So our platform is collaborate, advocate, and rebuild. We want to collaborate with the greater Columbia community and increase communication between different student governments and organizations with MSA. We want to advocate for marginalized identities on campus, and then we want to rebuild, which is rebuild trust in MSA and the administration by utilizing MSA as a platform to shine work on good work that various organizations are doing, as well as just trying to break down stereotypes and tension that exploded last semester. As opposed to, earlier?
Yeah.
Sure. So the big reason that I kind of decided was that, well, it all kind of started last semester. I was talking to someone who ran in the last election cycle, and we were discussing the fact about how the sitting undergraduate MSA president is one of the few people who has a line of connection with the system president and the chancellor. And after what I witnessed during this election cycle, the debacle over pocket points, MSA's lack of involvement and support of the various protest movements, and then our continued talking with various administration officials, including ARS, talking to the Black Culture Center, we kind of realized that MSA hadn't been reaching out to institutions outside of itself. And by not reaching out to advocacy organizations or even outside of the university, MSA had limited its scope and limited its ability to effectively advocate for marginalized individuals, which is something that I was kind of raised by my mother, who's a public school educator. She teaches English as a second language, which is actually called English language learners now, because it's not just a second language for some people. Sometimes it's their third or fourth. And she kind of raised my brothers and I with the intention of, you are white passing men. You need to look out for those around you. And if you're not looking out for other people, then you're not fulfilling what it is to be a human being, essentially. So that's kind of why I decided to run. I think a big thing that we need to do is come together not only as undergraduate students and unite the various undergraduate organizations and governments, and that's people from as far divided as like the Mizzou Energy Action Coalition, which is sometimes referred to as MEEC. We need to essentially get together with people like MEEC and people like IFC and formulate a list of demands in conjunction with grad workers. The Coalition of Grad Workers is doing a lot of really good things right now, or they're attempting to. Actually, right now, as we speak, the grad worker sit-in is happening at Jesse Hall. And what it comes down to is that we need to unite together and form a list of demands, and as a sitting MSA president, you have some bit of leeway in essentially keeping the system president, keeping the curators, keeping the chancellor, setting their schedule, and showing the issues that you want them to take steps on. It's really about, not exactly the formal power that the MSA president has, but the informal power and soft power of influencing what's important. What you can discuss in platform and what you get time to actually implement is they didn't really have a chance to do anything. I think some of their picks for cabinet were not bad ones at all. And I think they're, what they said about advocating for marginalized identities and the ways that they wanted to, I think are interesting ways to address it. But I think at the end of the day, we want to do something very different. We kind of want to change what MSA stands for, and we want to change the work that they're doing. We even want to change what the election process is. Because in our opinion, MSA needs to run as an advocacy organization and not keep pretending to be a student government. Because we don't have the power to enforce our laws. I mean, plain and simple. We have a budget, we have a body of people who want to represent, so we need to just focus on trying to do our best to advocate for marginalized identities. I feel like it's hard to answer that question without shaming the other slates and the good work that they're doing. We share some ideological differences. I don't support the library fee. I don't support. I don't have MSA experience. I didn't grow up in Mizzou as a freshman saying, like, I'm going to run for MSA president someday. Lydia and I decided to run because we saw inherent issues in the system that were brought to light by 1950, that were brought to light by this pocket points debacle, and we wanted to take steps to change them. We wanted to take steps that instead of MSA waiting for organizations to contact them, that they reached out, that MSA began the job of reaching out to those organizations. And I would say the biggest separation between me and the other slates is I've never seen an MSA government ever actually take the steps to reach out and address the community and foster working relationships with the community and use their resources to assist Mizzou in continuing to grow despite the budget cuts that are happening now and that may continue to happen in the future if the Missouri State Legislature gets their way. I have a lot of work in organizing various things. I have a lot of just academic experience in, fields dealing with politics. But really, I think MSA president and vice president is really what you make of it. There's a lot of administrative work that I would certainly, have a cabinet to help me out with, and I would certainly have people more qualified than me with MSA experience to assist me in helping that out. But I think really my lack of experience kind of allows me to think outside of the box and find solutions to problems that are not necessarily things that have been done over and over and over again. And I think that's what MSA needs to do. The university as a whole is kind of entering an unprecedented time. We have most of our administration in interim government. The Title IX office is being completely reconfigured to address discrimination on more than just sex basis. The Academic and Retention Services, headed by Donnell Young, is going to be changing its name soon and its entire purpose to not just focus. I mean, it's never just been focused on remedial issues, but now they're taking more steps to ensure that minority students, and to a smaller extent, but still factored in, all students have abilities to succeed, not just be retained. The university is undergoing an immense amount of changes, and I feel that I can bring a fresh perspective to MSA and hopefully help to spark the dialogues, or some of the dialogues have already been sparked, but kind of just feed the flame. I mean, continue implementing the good work that Tori Schaefer has done with the It's On Us campaign, but something that we want to do to combat sexual assault as well is to assist RSVP and IFC educators in their work of talking to the various IFC fraternities. That program is still in its infancy, but and maybe this is just in my opinion, but I feel like good social justice work, especially the combating sexual assault and explaining consent to people, combating rape culture, these are all things that, in my opinion, work more on an interpersonal level. They work better when it's coming from someone that you know well. And national campaigns are incredibly important, and Green Dot is incredibly important because it sparks that conversation. But at the end of the day, I feel like IFC men talking to IFC men about these issues, they see a brother speaking to them, and they see more of a connection. I've spoken to RSVP educators who did talks before IFC educators started, and they talked about sometimes it felt like a very hostile environment. I think we need to start thinking about other ways of using students and using the community to reach out to these groups rather than bolstering just large national awareness weeks, which are important and they serve a very important purpose. But I think we need to really just get back to a grassroots level on things. I mean, by our knowledge, these two people of color resigned within pretty close points of each other and then signed non-disclosure agreements, meaning they couldn't discuss it. I think it's a little unreasonable to not have an investigation, considering the events of last semester were so racially charged, and now that we are back to an all-white board of curators, it kind of begs the question, was there anything regarding race in these resignations, which kind of seems like there probably was, and why? It'd be nice to have exit interviews conducted, and it'd be nice to know why these resignations happened. You know, was this a forcible resignation? Was it something that they were so frustrated with the inability of white administration to fully grapple with the concerns of marginalized students? I mean, even today, Concerned Student 1950 is releasing things all across social media identifying that they're still concerned and that the administration is not acting with the urgency that they insisted that they would act with. At the end of the day, Tim Wolf and Chancellor Lofton, Wolf was removed, Lofton was repurposed, but that doesn't mean that the issues are gone. Systemic inequality still exists, retention of black faculty is still abysmal, and this culture still exists on this campus, and it needs to be addressed. And starting that investigation of why we can't keep people of color on the board of curators, that's a way to start. I mean, MSA does not need to be buddy-buddy with administration. In my opinion, MSA needs to be an advocacy group, and MSA, whether they would want to write a resolution endorsing an investigation or just begging the question, MSA needs to be comfortable with being at odds end with administration, because at the end of the day, a lot of the time, students as a whole are at odds end with the administration in the same way that employees are at odds end with employers and tenants with landlords. At the end of the day, undergraduate students hold more power than anyone else on campus because we pay tuition, but we're just so afraid of flexing that power. We're not being paid like grad workers. We pay them. It's nothing that acting as an MSA president that I can, actually hire private investigators to begin this investigation, but it's starting the dialogue, even if it's as simple as a Twitter post. I mean, I think we've seen with Peyton Head the amount of power that a MSA president can have to essentially spark a PR scandal at any time with the administration. And if the MSA president is consistently begging the question publicly and privately in formal and informal settings, eventually, hopefully, they'll reveal what's going on. And if they don't reveal what's going on, they'll at least try to take steps to adhere to the list of demands that 1950 made last semester and that LBC has made previously, and really, hopefully, we can finally start looking in the mirror and address issues that, since I've been a kid here, have plagued this university. I mean, I learned the definition of a hate crime in 8th or 9th grade when cotton balls were placed on the Black Culture Center. This is not a problem that has suddenly sprouted out of nowhere. These are very old systemic problems that need to be addressed, and the MSA president needs to be the one pushing this question. That's how I feel. I'm kind of confused. Are you saying that I consult people before I made this platform? Most of these platform ideas that we've come up with, specifically the ones I've talked about in this interview, are ones that we have discussed previously with people. For instance, I mean, just to go off a couple, the IFC Educators idea was not something that we came up with personally. That is a program that is in existence under Danica at the RSVP Center. That's something that's still working right now, and it's just something that we want to use MSA to kind of push it forward a little bit more. But honestly, I think it's a great program and it's working. Academic Retention Services under Don L. Young is still going right now. He just needs help in publicizing the events and mentorship programs that some of them are still in pilot stages. The special election has certainly cut our ability to maintain to start these lines of communication as quickly and effectively as possible, but big issue that we've talked to administration about and student organizations about is this MSA will craft these policies that are very well-meaning, but they won't consult the organizations that deal with these things primarily. Where we don't want to duplicate any efforts. And at any point in my platform, any organization or group or anyone would think that we're either duplicating efforts or doing something that wouldn't be feasible for that organization, I would implore that they reach out and talk to us, because we don't want to, you know, it's not like Lydia and I have a master plan that like we think is better than like the people that we're trying to like help and serve. I mean, if IFC educators came up to us and said, we don't want MSA's help whatsoever, that would just mess things up, then awesome. We'll just clap from afar and applaud their work. I mean, it's about getting the best result. It's not having our name attached to it. I spoke to Kathy Scroggs about this. She didn't have exact numbers. She said the MU financial office would have it, but she said it is about 15 students, which is a low number in comparison to the amount of people. But it's an issue that I actually met with Columbia Housing Authority today at 8 a.m. to discuss just the availability of public housing for students, and it's not something that would be very feasible, unfortunately, which was a disappointment to hear. The waiting list on public housing can sometimes stretch into 2 years, and that's not just public housing that exists here owned by the city, but also like Section 8 vouchers. There's a better term for it. That's not a very kind one, but that can also be about 2 years, which was disappointing to hear. We were talking with Kathy Scroggs about ways that we could do this, and Rashik Nizam in MSA Senate 1 or 2 years ago, I'm afraid I don't remember exactly when, he was discussing plans on working with Res Life to essentially carve out like a work-study program, so that their work that they would do would pay for their room and board, which is an idea, but it gets into a lot of hairy situations. But we really just want to continue reaching out to the community, so even if it's just like someone knows someone who knows someone who knows someone that has a house that someone could stay in for a while. I mean, I think MSA just needs to get into grassroots efforts and understand that sometimes we can't carve out a far-reaching policy, but I really want MSA to be reaching out and helping anyone it possibly can, whether that's through lofty or sometimes subtle and hidden ways. Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I've talked to a couple different Muslim students about, and it's more just the fact that right now they can pray in the chapel. Some of them who work in MSA or did work in MSA sometimes would pray in the MSA offices, pray in the women's center rooms, but if you're not affiliated with any of those and you're not comfortable in the women's center, which I'm very comfortable in the women's center, but there are some people who may not be, your option is, in a lot of cases, praying under a staircase or in the bathroom, which to me is sad. And the students that I've spoken to, and once again, you know, as I've said before, if this isn't something that people would want, I would be more than happy to accept their criticism and strike it from our platform. But the students that I've reached out to would certainly appreciate it. And that includes members of MSO, Muslim Student Organization. But long story short, the feasibility of it is pretty easy. You take one of these study rooms in the student center, black out the windows, put a lock on the inside of the door, slap a sign on it that says multi-faith prayer room, and anyone who wants to pray in there, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, whether they're wanting to meditate, whatever, they can go in there and use it. I just think it's an incredibly easy thing to do that would take little funding, little effort, little time, and would go to making a lot of people more comfortable on this campus. And that's the kind of work that I think MSA should be doing, more so than running midnight pancake breakfasts during finals week, which is great. I love pancakes, but I think we can do a little more meaningful work. Because that's not the purpose for them in the Women's Center. I mean, they're not for praying, unless I'm incorrect on that, and then, I'm wrong. But they're not for praying. They're for counseling, and they're for private conversations. And then also, the Women's Center closes early on some days. I think it closes at like 6 p.m. on Fridays. So if you're studying late, you can't even get into the Women's Center, while the study rooms are open until the Student Center closes. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things you could do with this. And I'd love to hear any and all responses. But different things that we had thought about is based on the intensity of the infraction, you could dock a number of votes from the final tally at the end. I mean, that is something that would affect all slates equally. You could cut back on days of campaigning. You could say, because of this, you are not allowed to post anything on social media for this day. You're not allowed to make any speeches. If you continue to do this, you get more days infracted, and then if you continue to do that, you're cut off from the campaign. But this is an issue that's, I mean, for me, it really gets to the heart of the matter that MSA can function as a very privileged space. When you start to evaluate people based on the amount of experience that they have in MSA organizations, you look at the only way that someone could dedicate this much time, and the only way that they could amass that amount of funding, is if they have the time to build those connections, if they have the time to put in that extra work, and then have the money to fund this entire operation. Campaigns are expensive. Social media ads are expensive. And a $300 fine could end a small campaign in a day. But to people whose single donors are putting forth $2K, it doesn't do anything. It's just a slap on the wrist. And that's not even to mention that, those infractions. I mean, the process of filing the infraction and appealing it and et cetera, won't happen until many days after the offense. And that's for one specific offense. So it's like, I don't know. It kind of throws up in the air like people who have a lot of money will commit infractions. And from my understanding, most of the slates in the last election period committed infractions. Left out of university traditions. For instance, the LBC homecoming court doesn't walk on the football field. Even the whole idea of our celebrating traditions here at Mizzou, we often forget the fact that black students weren't even allowed until 1950 to be on this campus. We're forgetting the fact that the Black Culture Center essentially used to be a house in a parking lot. I mean, to pretend, we can kind of see that the ultimate lashback against one Mizzou, which didn't take place, but 2 years ago? I think it was still a thing in my freshman year. The whole idea of Concerned Student 1950, and the reason why these different advocacy centers exist on campus is because people don't feel comfortable here on campus. Black students represent a sizable portion, but are not even remotely represented effectively by faculty. I think we have the infographics posted on our website about, or on, not on our, well, yes, on our website and on our social media platforms. It's important to see professors and administration officials that look like you. And I'm privileged enough that being a white male, most of them do. And when they don't, it hurts you psychologically and your ability, or it doesn't have to, but it can. And that's why 1950 protested. It's because we are inhabiting an institution that was built on racism. And it's our campaign's hope to, if not get into office and continue pressing this dialogue for a more inclusive institution, to at least use this platform to draw attention to those issues and draw attention to the good work done by not only Concerned Student 1950, but the protests that happened before that for some reason get forgotten about, like Racism Lives Here, or Naomi's MU for Mike Brown, that she did such a wonderful job promoting. These things have always been here, and it would be a shame if we, because it got a little hairy last semester, let the dialogue die. This is something that did exist at one point. So the funding is there, but daycare services used to be done until a firefighter died in a building collapse, and then daycare services never came back. They just kind of wrote it out of the budget, and they didn't, and Lofton specifically did not listen to the concerns of various grad students that were pushing for this. The funding exists. It can be found, and it can be done. Yeah. I don't know all the specifics, to be entirely honest. This is just something that we want to advocate for. It kind of goes back to this. I mean, there are undergraduate student parents as well that would benefit, but it kind of goes back to the fact that undergraduate students benefit more than anyone else from the work that grad workers do, and they are criminally underpaid and overworked and precluded from being able to get other jobs. A lot of times their contracts stipulate that they're not allowed to seek alternative employment to supplement their income. And I think undergraduates need to recognize that and align our interests more wholeheartedly with the people that are sculpting us, essentially. To be entirely honest, it will, because those are where I stand on my issues. But at the end of the day, I'm not looking for, carving this out to be more in line with Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. I'm carving it out to be more in service of the students and graduate workers, which we can try to color that with political lines, but at the end of the day, it's just what we need as students and administration. If you want to throw a label on me, I am left-leaning, but I don't think it's going to play too much of an impact. I mean, I want to do work that assists students as a whole. I want to kind of cross those lines. I mean, to put it in perspective, I was raised by a Catholic, Democrat, Mexican woman and an atheist, Tea Party, or libertarian white man. I grew up in a household where I had the two opposites of every ideology sitting at the dinner table, and I picked and chose the things that carved me out to be who I am. And if there's anything political about me, it's that I'm kind of certainly more leftist in my social justice than probably the rest of the slates, and more devoted to minority empowerment. But, I'm sure some of those slates might take issue with that. I mean, it was, as I've discussed earlier in the interview, IFC educators is something that we want to work with, and we would support the efforts of It's On Us. It's honestly just an oversight in this special election process. I mean, this is something that is incredibly important to us. It's just not something that we wrote down. It's something that we speak about fairly regularly, but it's just not something that actually made it into the fine print, which when Lydia and I realized that, we felt terrible, and we still feel terrible about it, because it's something that's incredibly important to each of us. It's just, we didn't know we were even going to run about a month ago. This is not even remotely okay that we didn't include it in the platform. It's a deep personal regret for both of us, I think. I mean, I think that is the biggest issue. I think social justice kind of encompasses most elements of our platform. Something I recently became more knowledgeable of is Connor Lewis's work with the Coalition of Graduate Workers, and that's something that I think needs to be addressed as well. Graduate workers here make about $13K, while the Midwest average is about $15K, and I've already explained, the issues with their inability to seek outside employment. I mean, they're doing most of the work of this institution, and they're not even allowed to unionize by the administration, because the administration doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that they are workers, and trying to lump them into being students and saying that students aren't allowed to unionize. Other issues that we want to address on this campus, would be MSA election reform and the culture of MSA, and MSA's inability or forgetfulness of reaching out to organizations that it should be assisting. I mean, when we spoke to Jonathan McElderly of the Black Cultural Center, and when we spoke to the exec of IFC, they both had the same questions. Like, when we asked, what can MSA or what can our platform do to assist you, they said they both didn't have answers for us because they said we hadn't been asked those questions before. And in my opinion, that's entirely unacceptable. MSA doesn't reach out, and that should be the only thing it's doing, is amplifying the efforts of other organizations and groups, not even necessarily carving out its own policy, just highlighting the voices of others. My biggest fear if I win, being stressed all the time, never seeing my family. No, I guess my biggest fear would be, that's an interesting question. Maybe not getting everything done that I set out to do, or maybe losing sight of the work I've done along the way. I mean, it'd be a lot. It's not an easy thing to be sitting in that seat, and I would hope that I wouldn't lose sight of my goals, and I don't think I would, because they're very deep, personal, emotional goals that am going to continue to work towards while I'm in the office of MSA presidency or not. I guess that would be my biggest fear, but it's not something I couldn't overcome. Yeah, absolutely. I spoke with one of the members of the Multicultural Greek Council recently, Deltas I knew, and a big issue that they're discussing is their lack of funding. And I think that's something that's hitting each of the Greek organizations really hard, is the lack of funding. But with multicultural especially, they don't have a long, some of these organizations are newer and they don't have a long list of alumni that they can fall back on and legacy that they can fall back on, like the other Greek organizations do, Greek chapters, I guess I should say. And a big thing that I want to do with each of these organizations is assisting and providing channels with community connections that I have to link the philanthropic work that they do so communities can get involved more than they already do. And by community, I'm speaking to the greater Columbia area rather than just campus. I think a lot of the work that we do oftentimes gets locked in almost like this iron cage of Mizzou and isn't able to, be reached out. We aren't able to connect with the greater Columbia population, and it's unfortunate because the greater Columbia population is oftentimes alumni who, when they donate, they just see the MU email that pops up, they throw a couple bucks to the athletics department, and they move on. But I think it's, for instance, there's a joint session that MSA does, from what I understand, every semester, and nothing really happens there, right? So all of these student governments get together, they say yes to some things, they say no to some things, and then nothing gets accomplished. What I want to do is extend, excuse me, extend not only formal, make joint session something that happens more regularly so we can all stay up to date on initiatives that we all have, but also extend those informal connections. And whether that's me getting coffee with IFC exec every once in a while, or going to more Greek org, meetings just as an observer, or, going to barbecues or whatever. It's more just about making sure that, we're friends and that we understand the work that each of us are doing and the importance that it has in our different spheres of Mizzou. I mean, it's foolish to think that Mizzou is all one huge community where we all hang out, but acknowledge that we're a community of communities. But we should be able to go back and forth between our own little settings and know what's going on in all these different little places and be able to help each other. Oh yeah, absolutely. As regularly. I think that's the most important thing that undergraduate students have, is someone that meets with administration every week. And I think whoever ends up meeting with them needs to press them on just different things to address the very clear social issues that we have here. And I'm not saying that an undergraduate president even has all the answers, but the administration has the resources to be able to find out real ways to affect decisive change. But they need to be shown by undergraduate students that it is an issue that we care deeply about. But I would absolutely meet once a week with Lofton, and hopefully meet at least monthly with the UM system president, at least, if not bi-weekly. But it's hard to even say that because we have no idea who that's going to be yet. I mean, most of these positions are interim right now, so it's kind of like they could appoint people that are more than capable of handling these issues at the UM system's flagship institution. They could appoint someone much worse. We're kind of just sitting with our hands in our lap and waiting. Sure. Well, not to repeat myself, but there's something that let me rephrase. I'm not going to repeat myself, so I'll talk about another way that we're hoping to increase collaboration. Something Lydia and I have been discussing is kind of, and as a history major, this is something people learn about in so many classes, but FDR instituted this method of fireside chats back during his presidency, which was essentially working to rebuild strength and trust in the U.S. government. So it would come out over the radio, everyone would listen to him. So we want to implement a similar thing. We want to create a 3 to 5 minute video and audio podcast, and hopefully working with people at MUTV, hopefully working with KCOU 88.1, hopefully working with, I've already met with David Owens over at 89.5 KBIA, and he's more than happy to, kind of make this a collaborative effort. But what this podcast would focus on is the good work that Greek organizations, the good work that social justice organizations, and the good work that MSA, as well as LBC, essentially highlighting the philanthropic efforts as well as administrative efforts to address problems on campus, and basically be like a 3 to 5 minute, what the exec thinks is important to learn about and to know about, and have it in an easily digestible form that hits both community radio outlets as well as the MSA social media accounts. Essentially use every arm of MU undergraduate media available, as well as community media, to get everyone on the same page. As someone who was a working student, I never knew what was going on around Mizzou. If you're working 30 to 40 hours a week and taking full-time classes, and in my case also doing undergraduate research, you don't want to go to every single separate media account or org account that you're interested in, because you're just exhausted. And it's hard to keep up with all the good work that people are doing. But we want to use that, and we want to use the Office of MSA President to highlight the good work that's being done in an effort to break down stereotypes that existed before last semester but have started to somewhat bubble up to the surface as a result of all of this tension that has emerged. Namely that being, as a student that's not affiliated with Greek life, when I hear fraternity, I'll be honest, I think of the SAE chants that hit, and now I think about the email that just recently got released, I think from Ag Row, and it's just, these are not the entire white Greek man population, but they're the images that come in our head. In the same sense, I'm sure a lot of people don't really know what Vagina Monologues actually is, which is happening this Saturday, and I'm really excited for it. I have tickets. They don't know what that is. They just saw people in the student center today saying vagina and throwing flyers, and I'm sure most of them were like, I don't know what this is, it makes me uncomfortable, and that was the end of that conversation. But we need a video podcast from the somewhat neutral place of MSA, that's not affiliated with anything that anyone can be uncomfortable with, unless you're talking about corruption, which I guess is what a lot of people think when they think MSA. But to digress, we need to understand that MSA should exist as an advocacy organization that promotes the interests and work of other groups and people. We have a $1.7 million budget, and it should be addressed towards that. I hope I answered your question. There is a director of student communications that exists on the exec board, and I would hope that they would work with us to do it. To be honest, this is something that I know could be easily recorded audio-wise. The video, there's a lot of specifics that we want to work out. But even if it was just me going and begging you all at MUTV to help me out with this, I mean, this is something that I think would be incredibly important. But I think working with them and working with the connections that I have over at KBIA with David Owens, we could, do at least a monthly podcast. I would prefer bi-weekly. And I would even more prefer weekly, but I don't know if anyone has enough time to do something that doesn't directly benefit them every single week to produce 3 to 5 minutes of content. I don't expect any students to volunteer that much work for something like that. But if we could carve out a team to do it, that'd be beautiful. I'd love that.